Hi everyone, Juana Lunte here with another episode of Unmatched, where we strip away the fluff to uncover the raw and unfiltered insights behind building community focused, consumer obsessed brands. Today we have a very special guest, Miruna Dragomir, the CMO of Planable.io, a leading tool in social media content planning. And in this episode, we're going to dive deep into how you can leverage social media content planning to build a loyal community and achieve sustainable growth. Miruna, it's such a pleasure to have you on the pod today.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I love the podcast and I'm super happy to be part of it.
Super excited to have you here and so much to unpack. So I'm going to jump straight into it. Give us a little bit of an intro for everyone who doesn't know what Planable.io is. What is Planable.io and what is the main challenge that you guys are solving for marketers?
Yeah, of course. We're a content collaboration platform for marketing teams. Essentially, that means that we offer them a space to work together on the content that they plan for social and for other types as well. We started with social media alone, and it all started out of this desire to fix the collaboration issue because there's loads of platforms out there, but collaboration and approval back then was never it wasn't solved in any way. There were sheets and emails and Slack messages and all of that, and it still happens that way. And so yeah, we really wanted to fix this back and forth issue.
Amazing. And full disclosure, I've used Planable for about a year and a half prior to us getting in touch, and I've loved the platform. I mean, as a marketer, working for a big brand, we use all sorts of other internal tools. And when I started to develop my own podcast and I started to be more active independently on social media, I started to feel very overwhelmed about like, how do I manage this? Like, if I want to be on all of the different social media platforms out there, how do I manage my time? And so when I discovered Planable, I was very excited to kind of use it and dive deep into it. And especially because obviously from a sentimental point of view, you guys are, a Romanian based, and that's such an amazing thing for a startup. And so, yeah, I've definitely loved it. I'm very curious about what started Planable and how was the journey of starting the business for you guys?
Yeah, so Xenia, our CEO, had a boutique agency and she offers social media services. And that was, first of all, that's how she first understood the problem because they wanted to do very high quality work and they had no way to show the content in a way that it actually put it in the best light, right? Because you could put rows in Excel, of course, but besides the fact that the feedback and collaboration is terrible, to just see it in a comment or in a separate email, but also, the content, it doesn't get the highlight it should. You work so hard to get the visual or the video right. You work so hard on the caption, and it's all supposed to be seen together. And yet, there's no way to do that. They used to do it in PowerPoint, like to use test pages and then kind of screenshot the posts and put them into slides and then get feedback that way, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of work. It can be a lot of work for one client. And if you have like 10 or 20, it becomes insane. And our CTO also worked in an agency, so he saw the problem firsthand. So that's kind of the agency to client type of collaboration in social was the first, the most obvious concern, the most obvious problem to be solved. And then after building Planable, we realized that bigger companies have the same issue. I personally worked at Oracle. That was my first job as a social media publisher, which, kid you not, was literally meant the job of copying and pasting posts from an Excel to a publishing tool.
Exciting.
It was luckily it quickly turned into something else, but like the job description for which I was hired, that was it. It was a social media publisher role. And I was supposed to copy paste the post. So it feels like fate that I found Planable and that I joined it and joined its mission because I knew the pain And
Yeah.
even when you were managing social, because at some point I ended up managing a few accounts myself, and there were plenty of stakeholders, and it's not like your manager or your peers. It's a lot about product experts and PR and brand, and so many other departments had to give feedback on the content. And it was this insane email thread with like 50 people cc'd, and the feedback would come in all sorts of moments in all sorts of ways, and you would have to manage all of that. And that was like, I think half the job was eaten by this management of information and communication.
So here's the thing, from my perspective, from where I stand, and having worked as a marketing director at a global company, it seems to me that somehow we tend to silo social media in a way, as in like,
Mhm.
oh, there's like brand, and then there's, I don't know, go to market, then there's product, and there's social media. And it's supposed to be kind of like this thing on the side where like, they're having fun with content, and they're just like creating, whatever content from, ambassadors and, products and whatever, and then that goes on the channels. Whereas in my mind, I think that social media is simply a distribution channel for your brand, right? So like brand and content need to be super, super tightly aligned. Yet for some reason, in a lot of different, types of companies, big and small, this doesn't seem to like, you know, it doesn't seem to work properly. Why do you
Yeah.
think this happens based on your experience so far? And what are the common mistakes that you see brands doing in this space?
Yeah, I think you really highlighted the biggest issue, the fact that they're so disconnected. And even for us as a company at Planable, we realized we kind of disconnect channels too. Like different people handle different channels. So we sometimes treat it like, okay, we have this campaign, let's just do what we know and distribute it on the channels that we have. And that's that. But when you put it all together, you realize how much opportunity you have to discuss about a launch, about a campaign in various ways, in various formats. And if you isolate social as this team that has to just whatever use the
Execute.
content and execute,
Yeah.
then it's not going to bring much. Yes, you have to be. It is sort of separate in the way that you can get super creative with the type of format and the type of content, but the core messaging, the core campaign has to be the same. And only when you integrate all of your channels is you start getting really creative, and you start seeing opportunities to spin it in different ways. Otherwise, like I know how the job feels like when you're just a curator of content, when you just get, look at our blog and see what you can share. That idea of sharing is so limited. So when you're isolated, you're only going to get a mild curation, and it's very difficult to grow on social that way.
So I'm kind of curious because you talked about how you guys at Planable do this, right? And so like from a B2B perspective, because I think
Yeah.
that we can separate, consumer brands from B2B sort
Yeah.
of services and companies or brands. How do you look at brand as Planable?
Well, it's interesting because it's a tough conversation in startups, and especially tech startups, because they're all like grow, 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 build, 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 and it's B2B. No one cares about brand. Just do whatever it takes to get those numbers up as quickly as possible. And brand doesn't have the reputation of bringing fast results, right? It's a long-term thing, and you're going to thank yourself further down the line, but initially it's very hard to dedicate time. And it's definitely a challenge for the team, because by default what happens is the talent that you bring in doesn't necessarily have the brand building background. Like, I don't have brand building background. I worked at Uber before, again, with a hustle mentality, just do campaigns, just do things to crunch the numbers to make it work. So it's a lot of adapting, and it's a lot of for us as a team, we always have to remind ourselves. Luckily, we have some core values that have stayed with us since day one. Again, Ksenia, our CEO, and our CTO are so design focused and so user experience focused that was a part of the brand that was born with it and that we always managed to integrate, even when we were hustling, even when we did campaigns from in just a few days, we still really kept the focus on the quality and the experience that we promoted. It's to kind of sum up the experience with how important brand is. I feel like every step of the way, every time we grow a bit more, we manage to make a little more space for it, for the defining it, for ensuring how cohesive it is, and for all of that. It's becoming more and more important.
And it's interesting because obviously in the end, social media is all about community building, right? That is at the core of why social media was created in the first place, to connect
Yeah.
people as much as possible. So social media for sure plays that role of bringing people together, creating communities, creating, and nurturing the super fans. So I'm wondering from your perspective, how do you see social media planning, helping that process of community building, from where you stand, obviously?
I think, yeah, planning is, first of all, allows you to have a strategy and to think about your presence on social as a whole rather than spontaneity alone, which is, I mean, credit where credit's due. Spontaneity can get you viral or it can mean brilliant ideas. But on the long term, the majority of your content should be planned ahead because you need to think about the messages that you're sending out there, about how, the tone of voice that has to be the same, about the topics that you cover. You have to, planning allows you to be cohesive and it allows you to experiment as well. And that may sound counterintuitive, but it's very hard to experiment when you just like post whatever's in your mind, because you end up running from one idea to another very quickly, and you never sit and strategize, and you never sit and analyze what ideas worked and what didn't. So that's the first thing. And the second, of course, is that planning is the only way you can integrate collaboration, which I think is the only way to take social to the next level. If you have one person doing it alone and not really getting insights or feedback from anyone else, it's hard to even call it a brand social. It's one person's opinion and values and everything rather than everything that stands behind a brand.
Well, you just said something that was light bulb moment for me, brand social. And I don't think that we call those teams like that. We just call them social media. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is such a good one. I think I'm going to steal this from you and just use brand social all the time. Because it is true. Like, if you really want to be brand oriented and community oriented, you have to be brand social
Yeah.
oriented. So I thought that was just brilliant. Coming back to planning and content creation, I mean, I'm sure that if there's anyone that knows this, it's going to be you guys at Planable. It's becoming more and more and more content that we need to create, right? And especially with the barrier being so low now to entry, you don't need sophisticated gear. You just need, a smartphone. You don't even need a microphone necessarily. You just need some headphones that are good enough. And not to mention now AI coming into play and lowering the barrier of content creation even more than that, so that literally we go from content scarcity to content infinity, in a very short space of time. How do we manage all this, and where is this going? Because it's even for me as a one person show, it's this pressure of like being on every platform, having content everywhere. For brands, it's even more. And it's not just one piece of content, it's 10 pieces of content per day, per platform, all platforms, all the time, day and night. And so I'm just thinking, from the perspective of where is this going and how can we curate also the quality of the content that is going out. What's your opinion on that?
I think the pressure is gonna fall much more on originality than anything else. And I feel like that's visible through the algorithms and the platforms. And that's what they're promoting now. Because, well, it makes sense, right? I mean, Google has its own AI, everyone has AI. If you generate stuff through AI, you're not really bringing any value to them, to the platforms, to anything. So they promote originality. Google does that. They call it up. They promote through the the algorithms by which they rank the websites. They really ask you to bring some sort of original spin to your content. Instagram said that as well. TikTok. So everything. The pressure right now is to create content that's your own and that brings something new to the table. I really don't think that we should cave into this pressure of doing it all, because there's always going to be a trade-off. And if the goal is to do it all, then the trade-off is going to be the results. But if you take it one by one, you'll someday maybe end up doing it all, but at least you have treated it separately and you have learned each channel and each content until you nailed it and you were ready to move on to the next one. And I think that's valid for anything. For social media, yes, of course, there's always new formats, there's always new channels. You can test it out, but don't leave everything you've done to start on this new trend. It's gonna end up like feeling like this nonstop run, and you'll have nothing to show for it after 3 years of trying everything.
And to your point, if you jump on every viral sort of trend, then the point about the originality that you made before, it's not going to be there. And so yes, you might
Yeah.
jump on a wagon for a few days, but then you need to start again, and it's a never ending race in the end.
Yeah, the way we do things, for example, is when you want to experiment something, first of all, leave it sufficient amount of time to actually test it out, not put one TikTok that's in that way, and if it doesn't work, then it's done. Clearly doesn't work for us. Second of all, allocate it like a certain amount of time, like 10%, 20% of our time goes to experimenting, the rest goes to what we know. And then try to, like, once an experiment is declared successful, okay, this is something that really seems like it deserves more of our time, it deserves to be integrated into the day-to-day tasks, then you go into optimizing the process, right? Like, okay, first we're original, we focus on quality, we focus on on doing it right. And then when you feel like you have some sort of a recipe and you know the ingredients, then you can start to optimize the process and to make it sustainable for your business long term.
How do you do that when you're starting from scratch? So, one of the previous guests says something that I thought it was really interesting and very, very true. Everyone starts from zero.
Yeah.
Everyone starts from 0 followers and 0 subscribers, and it's not a big drama. Everyone starts like that. So, that's the first thing. But what do you do? Because, it feels like this comparison to like, oh, if I would have started 10 years ago, it would have been so much easier. Yet, like today, you can start today and be kind of like, an internet sensation in 3 days because you're doing something that nobody does and it's picked up and you go viral. I mean, we have so many examples, right,
Yeah.
lately with that as well. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what would you do if you would start like today with 0 followers, 0 subscribers, like completely zero on all platforms? Where would you start and how would you start?
The beauty of starting from scratch is that there's nothing to lose. So that's kind of like, you have to keep that in mind. If you're cringe, if you're bad, no one cares. So you have the most space to experiment than anyone else. That's the biggest advantage that you have. So that's what I do. I'd experiment with everything that crosses my mind that makes a bit of sense, of course. Because if you have 3 followers on Instagram and you put polls on stories, I mean, it's not going to work because there's no one to reply. So as long as it's somewhat adjusted to your focus is growth on social, so focus on growing, not necessarily yet on community engagement because there's no community, right? So keep the common sense rules in mind, but experiment with everything as much as you can. At this point, yes, it doesn't, what I said doesn't really apply because there's nothing that works. Like I said, 20% of experimentation, 80% of what works, nothing works. So all in on experimentation when it comes to zero on social. And then I think, after you start to get a bit of insights, you start to test on doing the same things that show a bit of pickup. And you should still keep the velocity of experiments high, but try to become a bit more consistent as soon as you see any signs of positive reactions to a type of content.
And here's a bit of a provocative question maybe on this, but I always think that, or at least I see people kind of jumping into social media just because it's cool to build an audience and because it's the thing that you need to do these days, obviously. I don't see a lot of people sort of stepping back and thinking, okay, like I'm going to do this because I have this objective and because I know myself enough to know what I stand for. And so, as you said before, I'm gonna strategize a little bit about what I want to achieve and how I want to be sort of portrayed and seen on social media. So I'm gonna start to look for the type of content that would more align with me and would work for me. Yeah, I kind of like see people just like jumping, run in and being like, oh, what's there? Oh, this is trendy. This is viral. I'm gonna just like do this. I'm gonna do a dance and whatever, although maybe it doesn't really suit me.
Yeah.
What's your point of view on that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It has to feel natural. It has to be you, because otherwise, like one way or another, it's going to be visible that you're not comfortable, that it doesn't suit you. And that applies to channel as well, by the way, because I mentioned experiment with everything, but I would focus on 1-2 channels tops when just starting out. And some are going to feel a lot more natural. Not TikTok isn't easy for a lot of people, myself included. It's great to look at, but very difficult to create. There's platforms. On each platform, there's a specific behavior, and that behavior can feel a bit more or less natural to you. So I'd start with 1 or 2 platforms. And yes, like look at the trends and think about what could work, but always adapt it to your personality and don't try to mimic someone else's that you don't like, maybe you like but can't be. You have to be true with yourself, because it's yeah, people are not going to like it if you don't like it as well,
Yeah, you can sense that, right? Through
Yes.
the screen. So if you're not authentic, the people on the other side are not gonna connect with you, are not gonna engage with you. I had the same experience, I have to say. When I started on LinkedIn because I feel like that's the more nerdy social media
Hmm.
platform. Like it felt so natural for me to just write there. And I noticed as well the challenge, to transition from LinkedIn, which I feel like I'm mastering already and I know how to do, to go on to Instagram, which feels like more focused on like me and more
Yeah.
like nice pictures and here I am and posing and stuff like that, which is totally not natural to me. And TikTok, which is very much about entertainment and grabbing attention,
Hmm.
it's a huge leap, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I guess the question for me comes from a place of having worked in a big brand where I feel like when you are a person, it's easier to make those decisions and to experiment and, like figure out what works and what doesn't work. When you're a bigger brand, when you've scaled to a certain point and you feel like you have a lot to lose, experimentation on social media feels very risky.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what do you think about, what brands that are a bit bigger, how should they look at their social media strategy? What's that sort of percentage in between experimentation and doing what they think it works? And also what is aligned with the brand that maybe millions of people know already and love and appreciate?
Well, I do believe in you knowing your brand very well and making sure that it's well, shown out there and keeping the same voice. But I would say that I think social media in many cases, it requires maybe an alter ego as well, a different spin. And you can think about like that, like about people, right? I'm one personality when I'm at work, and I may have very different traits or different spin to myself when I'm with my friends. And it applies to brands as well. You can have a personality when you, as a brand, when you show up at a conference or when you're on LinkedIn, but you can show your funner side on TikTok, and that's allowed and it's fine and it doesn't count as brand inconsistencies. Um, and in terms of experimentation, I'd say, 20-30% should be doable for a bigger brand as well. And to diminish the risk of, I don't know, being offensive is the highest risk, being cringe, let's say, is the lowest cringe, the lowest risk. Um, I really think diminishing the risk is done by asking more people's opinions. And if you have a big company, it gives you the leverage of having multiple people, multiple generations, multiple types of personalities within the company. So what you should do is always try to involve like this. You can make a jury out of it. You can make it like, I don't know, a board of checking if this is going to land bad on social, right? And that's how you diminish the risk.
So, what do you think the top three things that bigger brands should focus on today?
Let bless you. I think the bigger brands should first of all let loose a bit, allow for experimentation, and as you said, bring your social back into the core of your brand. Make sure it's not isolated, and make sure more people get involved in it, not just the social team. Make sure people from product, make sure people from whatever departments get involved to, yes, diminish the risk, but also to bring up the originality that we talked about. It's the pressure on social is so high to produce content from scratch, but they most likely don't interact with the product at all. They don't know how it happens. They don't know about production, about users, about any of that. And the more people you bring in, the more information and original content you're going to be able to create.
And I think you mentioned something interesting, personality, right? So
Mm-hmm.
personality is so key on social media. I think one of the biggest challenges for bigger brands is find that personality.
Yeah.
And typically, what happens is that personality is brought by actual people, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
brand itself, it's an entity that you can have a certain image about, but personality is actually the people behind the brand.
Yeah.
So what we've seen on social, obviously working very much, especially in agencies and smaller brands, is actually putting faces, to the company in front of the audience. So say, two, three people from the social team are there just doing something on TikTok, and they're basically representing the culture and the way of working and, trends and insights of that agency or that brand. And I think that seems to work so well because I think this is where the audience also engages. It's also a matter of generation. So if you're, for example, addressing Gen Z, having Gen Z, part of the team and having them, talking the language of that generation helps. A lot of brands don't do it though. Again, I think, to minimize the risk, there's always this, okay, let's sell the product, let's show an ambassador, let's do this, let's do that, like very, very generic.
Yeah.
Um, I know that this is because, obviously the risk seems high, but what is the trade-off?
The trade-off is never getting to be known for something, to be remembered, and to have a distinct personality. You're going to have your limited fans that are probably fans due to something else. Like, I don't know, they really like the product, they really like something else, but not really your brand or your personality. And I think, yeah, it's about risks, but many times it's about how the culture of the company is and how open the communication is. Because you have someone on social, they might be younger, they might be, you hired a Gen Z to do your social because you want it to be fun, but then you block the ideas, or you don't encourage them enough, or you don't give them the courage that they need to become bold. So it's really about translate. I think part of the fault is on marketers as well, because you have the responsibility of finding the boldness in the company. It may not be your way of being bold. It may not be the what you're used to, because you follow some brands, you follow Ryanair, you follow Duolingo, you want to be like them.
Mhm.
That's maybe not the personality of the brand that you work for, but there has to be a spin there that it's your responsibility to find by testing within the company, testing with your managers, with the approvers, what strikes a chord, what do they like, what reflects the personality of the brand in the best way.
Yeah. And I think you make such a good point. I think this is where a lot of brands struggle because that personality is often missed across the whole company, across
Yeah.
the different departments, especially, bigger and heritage brands, brands that have hundreds of years of whatever history. It's difficult for them to kind of engage that side of things to the reality
Hmm.
of today. And the way I always say it is brands evolve, right? So it's about brand evolution, not brand building. You build the brand for a while, but then at some point the brand evolves. It becomes its own entity, and it takes the course of whatever the consumers, the audience, the super fans say the brand is. And so, coming back to the topic of the fans, because you mentioned that earlier, how do you see sort of the evolution of that? We went from, obviously, in the past, before social media, consumers didn't really have a voice with brands, and they didn't have platforms where to voice their opinions. We then went on to social media era, where there's this exchange of information, there's the co-creation even right now, which is quite interesting. I'm wondering, what's the next step, what is coming after this?
That's a good question. I don't know. In terms of interaction, consumer to brand, it may be taken a few steps back with AI. It might become, like an interface that has an intermediary between them with AI. I do think it's becoming less and less about um, a strict set of rules. I think I remember content pillars, and I remember how important those were, and how, everyone had like 3, 4 topics that they would cover every week and every month. And now I'm looking, and it seems because people's interests are becoming more dynamic, their personalities are like, today I like one thing, tomorrow I want to look at something completely different. Brands are becoming more dynamic as well, and I think that's the biggest change that I'm feeling.
Yeah, I feel you too. And I have to say, the other thing that I'm noticing is more of a one-to-one conversation, as opposed to sort of a message
Yeah.
propagated by brands and then sort of amplified by influencers, creators, and so on. I feel that right now we are at the point where just simply the one-to-one conversations, which you
Yeah.
see on social media a lot, but you also start to see in campaigns, where it's
Hmm.
not so much about the vast majority of fans or the vast majority of consumers that buy your product, but it's about that one single person who has had a deep, sort of relationship with the brand, has had some sort of experience that some kind of an insight uncovered it for you as a brand.
Yeah.
And so you're taking that one thing and you're putting it in front of millions, and then see if that connects or not. That seems to be,
Yeah.
for me, the next step, that it's more like personal, the more one to one, and the less, mass
Yeah.
conversation.
That's a very good catch. Yeah, I resonate with that so much.
What's the next step for you guys at Planable? I mean, you have a super nice tool for collaboration, for planning. what are the next steps that you see in that field as well? How are you expanding on that? How can teams and marketers, evolve that sort of a process of collaboration on social media as well?
Um, One thing is, of course, the what we already talked about, aligning other types of content as well, and isolating social. We brought other the ability to plan on other type of content like newsletter, blogs, events, anything really, any type of longer form content. Um, and that's one thing that we're focusing on to help marketing teams come together actually and plan campaigns together. Another is bringing additional layers of collaboration that reflect better how social media works today in light of TikTok, because it's so much less now about the final product. It's the process before even filming is so lengthy and so complex. It's collaboration on scripts, it's discussion on inspiration TikToks, and all of that. And we want to make sure that Planable is up to speed and it reflects the way that social teams collaborate today. And of course, AI.
I was
AI.
gonna leave it for the end, because like every conversation starts with AI right now. I was gonna just
Yeah.
leave it to her. So like now is the time.
Yeah. AI, of course, we're searching for, we already have AI in Planable, but of course, we want to make sure that we find not only the obvious uses of AI, like helping you to write better or to rewrite or to tweak or to add hashtags, but rather how can it really empower social teams to do what they do best, to focus on creation, to focus on originality, and to help them skip the steps that aren't using their talents best. That's the next step. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but but we're going to make it big enough.
Well, that's very inspirational also because in that huge conversation that we're having now about the role of AI and how AI is going to steal jobs and is taking away things from us, I think it's very refreshing to hear, opinions like yours that say, well, actually, what we want to use AI for is to make marketers more creative, so they
Yeah.
can spend time on the actual creation process, which I think is always the intention behind the tool. But it seems that somehow the conversation has skewed into, oh, it's coming to get us and it's
Yeah.
going to kill humanity.
Yeah. I really can't see right now. Maybe this will not age well, but I really can't see right now how there is ever going to be a world in which we only consume AI generated content. AI generated content right now is based on human generated content. So I don't think that if all humans suddenly stop generating content, we're just going to we're just gonna reuse, reconsume the same content that we've seen. So I don't think that's a possibility in the near future.
I hope you're right. God knows I hope you're right. Because, the conversation around the future of cinema and sort of music and movies and stuff is it quite interesting to listen to. But I do hope you're right. So, one last question for you, Mira. What are you personally excited about in this new era of, technology and social media that we're kind of stepping into?
I'm excited about the liberties that social media managers have now. I'm excited about the role being transformed from from a curator to an artistic creator, and I think that's great. And I want to dive more into that myself. And I'm excited to empower more of that and Planable.
Love that. I love that empowerment of creativity. We all need this. And with that being said, Miruna, thank you so much for being on the pod today. It was a real pleasure chatting with you, and I'm really hoping to speak again soon. We need to do another one to see the evolution of all this.
Yeah, to see if we were right or wrong.
Yeah, exactly. We do one every year to see where we're at.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.